The headline circulating today says Mastercard just bought Ripple's secret XRP infrastructure for $1.8 billion. Retail investors are panicked, screaming about a corporate buyout or a hostile takeover. The crowd is looking at the clickbait, but the smart money is looking at the plumbing. Here is the hard truth. Mastercard did not buy Ripple. What they actually did is far more structurally significant. On March 17, 2026, Mastercard executed a binding $1.8 billion agreement to acquire BVNK, a global stablecoin infrastructure titan. They didn't buy the XRP ledger, they bought the exact enterprise piping required to route global stablecoin and fiat flows directly into blockchain networks. Welcome back to Crypto Report. We do not react to sensational headlines here, we decode the architecture beneath them. In a market that rewards noise, the edge belongs to those who understand the mechanism before the crowd does. Today, we decode the $1.8 billion BVNK acquisition, why the retail narrative of a Ripple buyout is fundamentally wrong, and how Mastercard's new stablecoin engine mathematically validates the exact settlement infrastructure XRP was designed to provide for the $9.5 trillion they process annually. Let's get into it. Here is the fundamental misunderstanding spreading like wildfire across retail crypto forums right now. When people see the word stablecoin next to a $1.8 billion Mastercard acquisition, they assume Mastercard is just trying to build a consumer crypto wallet. They think this is about letting retail users buy coffee with digital dollars. That assumption is not just wrong, it is completely blind to the actual architecture of global finance. Mastercard does not deploy $1.8 billion to process retail coffee transactions. Mastercard processes approximately $9.5 trillion in payment volume annually across 210 countries. A massive percentage of their revenue comes from cross-border transactions, a sector plagued by the 1970s architecture of the correspondent banking system. Legacy international transfers require 3 to 5 days to settle, navigating a maze of pre-funded Nostro and Vostro accounts and extracting fees of 3% to 6% per transaction. This is where BVNK enters the equation. BVNK is an enterprise-grade infrastructure company that specializes in bridging traditional fiat networks with on-chain stablecoin rails. By bringing BVNK in-house, Mastercard is not just experimenting with blockchain, they are hardwiring stablecoin settlements directly into their core global network. But here's the hidden mechanism that the crowd is ignoring, and it is where the XRP ledger becomes structurally undeniable. When Mastercard routes billions of dollars in cross-border payments through stablecoins, those stablecoins do not magically teleport between jurisdictions, they require a settlement layer. If a corporation in London needs to pay a supplier in Tokyo, routing a US dollar-pegged stablecoin like RLUSD across the globe still requires a highly liquid, fraction of a cent, and instantaneous bridge asset to convert value natively without creating new counterparty risks. You cannot route a fraction of $9.5 trillion in annual volume through a network that suffers from congestion or unpredictable gas fees. You need a purpose-built, enterprise-grade settlement engine. You need 3 to 5 second finality. You need native ISO 2022 data compatibility so that compliance flags and regulatory identifiers are not stripped during the transfer. This is exactly what the XRP ledger was architected to do from its inception. Mastercard recently launched a crypto partner program featuring 85 digital asset firms, explicitly including Ripple. This is not a coincidence. When a giant like Mastercard acquires the infrastructure to move value on-chain, they are actively building the demand funnel that requires an asset exactly like XRP to function as the universal bridge. The retail crowd sees an acquisition and asks what it means for the daily chart. The institutional architects see an acquisition and realize the legacy banking monopoly has just been handed an eviction notice. Mastercard is building the highway, but the XRP ledger is the only infrastructure tested and scaled enough to carry the freight. Let's put the clinical mathematics on the table, because this is where the retail narrative breaks down, and the structural reality becomes undeniable. The global cross-border payments market processes approximately $150 trillion annually. To facilitate this massive flow of capital, the legacy correspondent banking system relies on nostro and vostro accounts. Right now, there is an estimated $27 trillion sitting frozen in these accounts globally. It is idle, non-yielding capital parked in foreign jurisdictions for one reason only: to guarantee that a slow, fragmented system has the liquidity to eventually clear a transaction. When a giant like Mastercard signals its intent to bypass this archaic system using stablecoin infrastructure, they are not aiming to capture a small slice of the pie. They are aiming at the $27 trillion inefficiency, but to capture that market using a digital bridge asset, the underlying math imposes a strict design requirement. Here is the supply shock equation that the mainstream financial media refuses to broadcast. XRP has a strictly fixed maximum supply of 100 billion tokens, with roughly 55 to 57 billion currently in circulating supply. According to recent on-chain data, XRP exchange reserves, the liquid supply actually available for purchase on the open market, have plummeted to multi-year lows. Where are those tokens going? They are vanishing into institutional cold storage and custodial vaults. When a Tier 1 asset manager or a spot ETF absorbs millions of XRP, those tokens do not return to the retail order book for a quick swing trade. They are permanently removed from the accessible float because they are being treated as foundational infrastructure, not speculative inventory. Now run the settlement formula. If even 1% of the $150 trillion annual cross-border market migrates to the XRP ledger, that is $1.5 trillion in annual settlement volume, or roughly $4 billion in daily transaction flow. If you attempt to push $4 billion of daily volume through a bridge asset priced at $1, the slippage would be catastrophic. The system would collapse under its own weight. To settle institutional-grade volume with the fraction of a cent efficiency that networks like Mastercard demand, the price of the bridge asset must be exponentially higher. A higher price is not a bullish prediction. It is a mathematical prerequisite for the infrastructure to function at scale. Massive utility demand colliding with a shrinking liquid float creates a vacuum. In the world of fixed supply economics, that vacuum can only be filled by a violently upward repricing event. The math does not care about retail sentiment. The math only cares about liquidity depth, and the depth required for the new global standard demands a price that most people still believe is impossible. We are not looking at a single isolated acquisition. We are looking at a convergence timeline where multiple, massive institutional and regulatory catalysts are stacking on top of each other. The Mastercard infrastructure acquisition does not exist in a vacuum. It is the latest domino in a carefully orchestrated sequence of institutional positioning set to collide with the most significant regulatory unlock in United States history. For the past several years, the mainstream narrative has been that institutions are waiting for regulatory clarity. That narrative is now officially obsolete. The institutions are no longer waiting. They are actively buying the plumbing while the final legal signatures are being drafted. The Digital Asset Market Clarity Act is in its final stages of negotiation, alongside groundbreaking new SEC guidance that explicitly names digital commodities. This legislation is the ultimate green light. It formally removes the regulatory risk premium that has suppressed institutional deployment of digital assets for a decade. But you must look at what is aligning directly alongside this legislative window. BlackRock has publicly committed to tokenizing its massive ETF portfolio, a move that will require instantaneous, compliant cross-border settlement rails. Simultaneously, Ripple is advancing its pursuit of a Federal Reserve master account following its conditional approval for a U.S. National Trust Bank charter. With Kraken recently breaking the barrier by securing direct Fed access, the legal roadmap is now proven. A Fed master account allows Ripple to plug its stablecoin, RLUSD, and the XRP ledger directly into the Federal Reserve's payment systems, bypassing legacy correspondent banks entirely. Now, overlay Mastercard's $1.8 billion stablecoin infrastructure acquisition onto that exact same calendar. These are not four separate stories. They are four massive acceleration vectors converging on the exact same moment in time. When the Clarity Act passes, it triggers a compliance cascade. The legal and risk departments at the world's largest financial institutions, who have been staging capital and acquiring infrastructure like BVNK in the shadows, will finally issue the authorization to go live. When that institutional gate opens, the deployment of capital does not happen slowly. It does not trickle into the market over a period of years. It floods in simultaneously because the regulatory barrier is lifted for everyone at the exact same second. In financial markets, when multi-trillion-dollar demand vectors are activated against a fixed supply asset with shrinking exchange reserves, the transition is violent. The price does not walk up, it gaps up. The window to position yourself before the market reprices reality against this newly built architecture is closing. The convergence is not a theory, it is a scheduled event. Let me leave you with this final verdict. The global financial system is not going to loudly announce its own replacement. It is going to quietly acquire the necessary infrastructure, secure the regulatory permissions, and then simply flip the switch. Mastercard buying a $1.8 billion stablecoin engine is the clearest signal yet that the era of traditional correspondent banking is dead. They are preparing for a world where value moves on-chain, instantly, and without the friction of the past. The XRP ledger was purpose-built for exactly this transition. It has the speed, the compliance architecture, and the fixed supply scarcity that the new institutional economy demands. The retail market is staring at daily price charts, letting fear and exhaustion dictate their decisions. Meanwhile, the architects of global finance are laying the pipes for a $150 trillion migration. The math does not lie. The convergence timeline is set, and the infrastructure is already paid for and plugged in. If this structural breakdown gave you the clarity that the mainstream noise is deliberately hiding, hit the like button and subscribe to Crypto Report. We will be here tracking every single institutional move as this timeline accelerates. I am Crypto Report. Stay patient, stay rational. We don't wait for the future, we plan for it.